So, Professor Ruth.
Yeah,
Yes.
I organized another appointment at the hospital, so we can go on.
Thank you. Thank you for arranging that. And we are very happy to have you. How is the weather back in Netherlands?
It is very hot, at least hot for Dutch, and so it's about 30 degrees.
30 degrees. Okay. We here, it is slightly cooler.
I should have come to you.
We warmly invite you to come to this beautiful campus. We have a very nice campus at IIM Bangalore.
I will ask my doctor permission.
Yes, yes, yes. We would. I can talk to your doctor as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Professor, I think it is time we can start this session.
Yep.
So I will take a few minutes to introduce our center, our institute, as well as the topic. And then I will request you to start your presentation.
Yeah, very good.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to, in fact, good afternoon and good evening to those who are in India and Japan, and good morning to those who have joined us from US and Europe. Welcome to MIJSC at IIMB, Tatsujin Speak webinar lecture series. My name is Saideep Ratnam. I am the Chief Operating Officer at this Center of Excellence. Mizuho India Japan Study Center, as I said, is a Center of Excellence at IIM Bangalore, Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. The focus of this center is basically to strengthen India and Japan bonds by promoting academic, industry, and societal linkages. This webinar, in fact, is one such attempt to increase the bond, wherein we are bringing in experts from across the world to talk about societal, technological, business, and other facets of life, highlighting both the global, Indian, and Japanese perspectives on various topics. In fact, this is the 15th webinar in this series, and we have with us Dr. Ruth Feenhofen. He is the Emeritus Professor of Social Conditions for Human Happiness at Erasmus University, Rotterdam in Netherlands. I have a great pleasure to welcome Professor Ruth. He has been a student of psychology all his life, and he is accredited in social psychology and social sexology. He is also a special professor at Northwest University, which is in South Africa, where he is involved in Opentia research program. And very interesting, which he will be sharing with you this afternoon and this evening. He is the director of the World Database of Happiness, and he is the founding editor of the Journal of Happiness Studies. So we have one of the foremost experts in this field of positive psychology. Professor Feenhofen's research is mainly on happiness in the sense of subjective enjoyment of life. One other strand of his research is happiness and public choice, the purpose of which, as he explains, is to build an evidence basis for policies that aim at greater happiness for a greater number. And today we will have the benefit of his thoughts on this very important aspect about happiness and public choice. Another research line is on the private choice. So happiness and private choice, which is the purpose to build an evidence base on which individuals can draw when faced with major life choices. Welcome to this forum, sir. I would like to set the context for the discussion for today. The theme for today's discussion is geography of happiness, perspectives across nations. Dr. Ruth Feenhofen, for short, I will call him Dr. Ruth, will talk on the definitions of happiness and review the empirical research across the globe. He would also focus on the drivers of happiness and look at India and Japan as possibly the case studies and discuss many of the correlations that he is so fond of. Correlation, for example, between happiness and factors such as economic growth, longevity, and so on. So welcome to this forum, sir. And it is over to you to take us through your thoughts on this very exciting and interesting topic.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Am I on screen now?
You are on screen, yes.
Oh, great. Sorry for the delay. I made a mistake with the time. I thought I would give this presentation in my time in the evening. But okay, I'm here and I now share my screen and open a presentation. And for understanding the geography of happiness, I must tell something about the science of happiness. And well, science begins with a concept. What is a happiness? And happiness is a word with many meanings, but mostly it denotes a good life. And especially in philosophy, the term happiness was actually a synonym for what we call today quality of life. And the philosophers, they discussed about what makes a life good, and they never agreed. What I use the word happiness in a more focused meaning, and to explain that meaning, I give you an overview of the different notions of quality of life. There are chances for a good life, for instance, being raised by loving parents, but there are also outcomes of life. Even if you have been raised by loving parents, you can end up as a drug addict. And there are qualities in your environment, and there are qualities in yourself. Well, that gives 4 qualities of life, which have all been called happiness. The chances for a good life embodied in your environment, that is what I call the livability of your environment. And say the most livable is heaven and the least livable environment is hell. But there are also chances in yourself, and that is your life ability. And some people are so able, so strong mentally and physically, that they can even survive in conditions close to hell, such as in the German concentration camps in the Second World War. And probably you also know people who are so difficult that even if they had lived in heaven, they would have quarreled with the angels. But we are talking about chances for a good life, which is not the same as the outcome of life. When you consider, do I have a good life? And consider the usefulness of your life, well, then for academics, it is typically that you count your number of publications. Right. And the higher the pile, the more useful your life is, at least academically. Well, that helps to illustrate that usefulness is not the same as satisfaction. And because if you write all the time, your spouse may leave, and a lot of things you would like to do in life, you don't, because you are very focused. Well, when I talk about happiness, I mean happiness in the sense of satisfaction. Yes. Next question. And what is satisfaction? Again, one word, again, multiple meanings. There is passing satisfaction, there is enduring satisfaction, there is satisfaction with parts of life, and there is satisfaction with life as a whole. And the passing satisfaction with a part of life, we call that a pleasure, which can be sensoric, a good dinner, good sex, but it can also be intellectual. And I hope that this seminar will be an intellectual pleasure for you, but it's passing. There are enduring satisfactions with part of life, such as the satisfaction with your country, the satisfaction with your job, the satisfaction with your family. Yes, you can be satisfied with a lot of domains in life, but still not with life as a whole. For instance, you have it all, but you miss meaning, then your life satisfaction can still be lower. Well, talking about now satisfaction with life as a whole, you can also experience that in passing. That is what psychologists call top experience or a peak experience. And when poets write about happiness, that is typically about that one sublime moment which they will never experience again. And actually, the first book on happiness I read was from a Dutch psychiatrist about people who were pathologically happy, who remained in the peak state all the time, and for that time were referred to a mental hospital. You can be too depressed, but you can also be too happy. And, well, most people just have a top experience now and then. And it appears that the ones who have more often these peaks tend to be less satisfied with life as a whole. And one reason is probably that, well, if you have had a top, then the usual life is a bit gray, and the cold turkey effect. And another reason is that, well, top experience may be disorienting. And not for nothing, that people who are in top all the time, we're referred to a mental hospital, especially if they were business people and in their high made wrong decisions. Well, if we look at, if we want to raise greater happiness for a greater number, well, then we don't go for more pleasures or satisfaction with particular domains or be high all the time. No, we want life, we focus on life satisfaction. Okay, then the next question is, can that be measured? If not, well, we stay in the phase of the philosophers, armchair philosophing. But yes, we can do that. By definition, life satisfaction is something that people have on their mind. So you can ask them. And you can ask them, well, one global estimate, how satisfied are you with your life? But you can also do it by asking people repeatedly, and how happy do you feel now? Well, an example of a global question is this one question that has been used in large-scale surveys. And it reads, taking all together, overall, how satisfied or dissatisfied are you with your life as a whole, not domains, and these days? Yeah, especially if you interview elderly people, you should be sure that they tell how they feel about their life now and not how they felt when they were a student. But, well, if you have such a question, well, and this is a pretty clear question, and it's actually the definition of happiness, well, then people who are very dissatisfied, they say 1, and the people who are very satisfied, they say 10. And it is an easy question that almost everybody understands. The percentage of people who say don't know is typically lower than 1%. And I think that among these people, philosophers will be overrepresented. The other way is that you ask people repeatedly, how do you feel now? Well, there are advantages and disadvantages to these both measures. This simple question, well, that you can easily insert that in an ongoing survey, and so it's not very costly, and it is, well, very helpful to chart average happiness in large populations. A disadvantage is that the answer is not very precise. The same person can say 8 today and 7 tomorrow after a row with his wife. That is not a problem if you have big samples of more than 1,000 people, because then these variations balance out. But if you want in your business to see the effect of a change, for instance, you have hired a chief happiness officer and you want to know whether your people really get a bit happier, yeah, well, then the effect will be limited anyway, and then you need a precise measurement. And well, and then you can do it on the mobile phone, and there are several programs to do that. And then you have per person, you can ask them, say, 20 times during 2 weeks. And then you have a better average, and then you can identify the effect that the chief happiness officer possibly has. Well, and happiness can be defined. There are good techniques to measure happiness. And this has given rise to a lot of research. And what we do at Erasmus University, that is to gather that research. And because the number of findings has become too big to be overviewed easily. And what I'm going to do now is show you this World Database of Happiness, and using this World Database of Happiness, show you some of the findings, and in the discussion, we can go deeper in that. So I stop share this one, because the link doesn't work from this version of. And I share again. Wait a minute, my wife was. Nee, heb ik uitgesteld. Ik zit nu in India. Let's see, I have a new share.
Professor Root, if you put it on a presentation mode, now the link will work.
Okay, now the link will work. Then I go back.
If you put it in presentation mode, then it will work.
Okay, I start share.
No, you have to put the PPT in presentation mode.
In the presentation mode. It is in the presentation mode.
No. To the right side, bottom. One more. The last one.
Ah, I see. Yes. I learn a lot.
Now it should work. No, again.
It doesn't. I haven't updated my version.
Now you put it in PowerPoint mode?
Yes, then I go to, I stop share here, then I share again. We have a great technique, but not without problems.
Technology.
Let's see, share, and then I go to World Database of Happiness. Well, this is how the, yes. Do you see it?
Yes, we are able to see it.
Okay. For this World Database of Happiness, well, we harvest the results. And how we do that? Well, first we scan the literature on subjective well-being, and that is a wide literature that is, well, to date about 2,000 publications a year, of which only a part is about happiness in the sense of life satisfaction.
Right.
So we read this all, not entirely, but just to see what it is about, and we select on concept. And then we have an overview of the public scientific publications on happiness. And you see that's, well, almost 60,000. That's quite a lot. And then from these, we select the publications that report an empirical study. Say that is about 10,000. And from these, we select the studies that use the valid measure of happiness, because not all measures really fit our definition. Well, that leaves us with some 500 publications, reports of empirical studies last year. And from these, we extract the research findings. And there are findings on how happy people are in nations, in occupations, in marital states with particular diseases. And here we have, and this is what I call the correlational findings, the things that go together with happiness. Is there a correlation between your happiness and income? Will you be happier when you retire? Or will you be happier when you divorce? Things like that. Well, and together that is about 50,000 publications. Well, I'm not going to review all these 50,000 publications today, but just give you a view on a few and will help you to find your way. And well, in each of these collections, for instance, the bibliography, well, you can select on authors, but mostly you will select on the subject, let me say age. And well, there you see that there are correlates of happiness and individual, social status, age. I click here and you see there are 481 publications on age. Well, you can do the same in correlational findings, age. And yes, there were more findings than publications, because in the publication, yeah, there reports the age of young and old, and of married and unmarried. So you get more findings than publications. And just to show you an example of how such a publication look like, here we have the so-called finding page. And well, this is among working people, working age people in Afghanistan. There were 607 of them. They were interviewed face to face. And well, age, and it is in these categories, and it is split by marital status. And you see there is no correlation. Afghans are unhappy whether they're old, are young, or married or unmarried. Well, often you would like to have a better overview of all these findings, and some of them are combined in reports. And there are reports on happiness in nations, in single nations. And here you see the world map of happiness, which is already interesting in itself. The darker the color, the happier the people. So here is the world champion of Denmark, with an average of, say, 8.2, which is, I think, close to the maximum possible in a country. You will not have a country with an average of 10, because there is inevitable suffering in human life, and no society can serve all of its citizens equally well. Well, here is the world champion, but you see in Norway, they are also pretty happy, and in Sweden and in Finland, and they're also quite happy in Canada.
Right.
The surprise here is Latin America. You know, Latin America is no paradise, at least if you read the newspapers. But interestingly, the Mexicans are happier than the Americans. And for that reason, I think it was a great idea to build the wall here to prevent the Mexicans to go to a less happy place. Okay. You're, of course, interested in the happiness of India and Japan.
Right.
Well, if I go to India, 6.1, to Japan, 6.2.
Right.
And we can have a closer look at that if I click here. Well, here you see the 6.1, and which means that India ranks, well, in the lower middle of the happiness distribution around the world.
Right.
But here you see also the change in happiness. And we already had data from 62. Actually, 2, but both pretty miserable. And then in the 70s, well, the average was still low, but then it got up after the year 2000, and it had its peak, say 5.9 in 2004.
Mhm.
And then a decline set in, which I cannot explain. And I'm really puzzled. And I'm even more puzzled that it is a bit better now, whereas most of the countries have a COVID dip. So
Yes.
India is a very special case. And I don't know the answer yet, but it's interesting. Let's now go to Japan. And here we see a much more horizontal effect. If we go from the very beginning in 1958, it was a 5.7. And now, well, there is a small rise. A problem in the case of Japan is that the questions have changed over time. And we did a lot of research to make these different questions comparable. And when we do that, we get a slightly different picture that nothing has changed.
Right.
Just, anyway, either there was a small rise or no rise at all, but in Japan, we do not witness a decline, as we saw in India.
Yes.
Well, some more what you can find here about Japan, and this is, of course, a selection of the many findings on distributional findings. If I click here, then here is a link to all distributional findings on happiness in Japan, and that is quite a lot. And here you see it sorted on question and year.
Right.
And so for each question, you can see whether it is a rise or decline, but none of these questions covers the whole period.
Right.
This is the longest time series, but even here there have been slight changes. Here you have a variant for F, and then it goes to 4E. Just a little change in the wording of the question, but it can make a difference in the result.
Right.
Okay, and then lastly, let me go to, here's an overview of correlational findings in Japan. And here you see the subjects, for instance, of activity and age. Well, you saw that earlier, that there are almost 1,000 findings on age, Well, 11 of these are in Japan. And if I click here are these 11 findings,
Right.
and some especially for regions, some for special publics. And here you can select the public.
Right.
And here we have the general public. Well, and just to show you how the page looks like. And here you see that there is a tendency to get happier
Right.
in Japan. Well, I think this is it for the time being. I think that it's better that I tell more about what has been found precisely using your questions.
Thank you. I think you have given an excellent framework. The first framework that you talked about was in terms of chances versus outcomes, and both external and internal. And then you took us through the past, immediately past, or the whole, partly or wholly, and whether it is passing or enduring. I think this is an excellent framework for us to understand. But taking you a little back, Professor, from the Freudian times, psychology has focused on the darker side of human being. But in more recent years, as you pointed out in your introduction to the topic, positive psychology seems to have become a very well-established approach to understand the human, or one aspect of human psyche. Could you throw a little more light on this transition from the purely negative to a positive approach to looking at human beings?
Yes, well, I think it's rather logical that you focus on suffering in the first place.
Uh-huh.
And like in medicine, well, the first concern was that we do not die prematurely. But now currently, also in the medical field, there's more attention to quality of life, and ever more people decide, well, to stop living when it's not rewarding anymore.
Right.
And so in well, psychology, there is, of course, the psychotherapy for people in mental problems. And actually, that has grown exponentially since the times of Freud. And but next to that develops well the psychological interventions for people who are, well, don't really have a problem, but still think they could make more of their life. And that positive psychology movement is actually driven by the training professions. And they have, well, a stronghold in business.
Mhm.
And well, here are, well, the life coaches who even a good life coach first assess, well, do you have a problem? Well, then first solve the problem with a trained psychologist. And if not, if it's finding a way of life that fits you better, then you're at my office in the right place. And yeah, you could say, that, well, psychotherapy is for the unhappy, and positive psychology is for the not too happy, and who think they could get happier. And yeah, why is that a flourishing business? Well, because a lot of people know that it's possible to have a happy life. If you read in the newspaper that the average in Denmark is 8.2, well, then you said, well, that's apparently possible. I'd like to have that. How do I do that? Well, of course, one way is to migrate to Denmark, unfortunately, as a migrant, you will be 1 point below the average of the Danish, but still you will have a 7.2, which is for most people in the world about 2 or 3 points higher than in the country where they live now. And so the people are quite rational when they want to go to happier countries.
Thank you. I think, but tell me one thing, Prof. I mean, intuitively, one would think that richer the country, the happier the people. Of course, I don't know within Europe whether the Danes are more happy, more wealthy than the others. That I don't know. Does the current research support such a hypothesis that richer countries are happier than the others?
Yes, it does, but there is much discussion. My colleague, Richard Easterlin, used the first national happiness data in the 1960s and 70s. And actually, he found much difference, richer countries being happier. But when he looked at the change over time, he found no effect. And so he said, well, for some reasons, Americans are happy, but over time they got twice as rich, but remained equally happy. And actually the same is true for Japan. And we have seen the flat line of Japan. Let me show it again. The Japanese have hardly become happier, but they're twice, 3 times as rich as they were in 1985. And that brought Easterlin to the theory that happiness is a matter of comparison, and that we compare to our countrymen. And the comparison doesn't change if you everybody gets happier. And he expresses it, the rising tide raises all boats. And in the boat are the Japanese comparing with each other and remaining equally happy. Yes, that is a fascinating theory, which was very much welcomed by the Green Movement, because they need an argument for zero growth. But to my regret for them, it's not true. The cases that Easterlin saw was the US and Japan. And these appear to be an exception on the general rule that typically when wealth goes up, average happiness goes up. And there's even a tendency that, in the beginning of economic growth, average goes up, but also the inequality of happiness. But in the later stage, like in Denmark, both the happiness is high and the inequality is low. And you can see that here we have, so you have average happiness, you have inequality in happiness. You can measure that with the standard deviation, and you can combine that in inequality adjusted happiness. And here the Danes are on top. They have a low standard deviation, they have a high average, and on a possible scale from 0 to 100, that would be everybody happy, everybody equally happy. That doesn't exist, and they are on rank 71. And yes, and then the question is, why does economic growth add to greater happiness? Of course, it's better to have more than to have less.
Right.
And you see that when people have less, when there is an economic recession, and you see a sharp fall, well, sharp,
Right.
half a point, and then the growth is more gradual, but we have more periods of growth than of decline, and so typically we get up. And of course, well, economic growth is, well, also a measure of it. It also mirrors societal modernization. And
Right.
what the main finding so far on happiness in nations is the more modern, the more happy. In my view, modern society fits human nature better than traditional society, which is actually, in the broad perspective, agricultural society.
Truly a very interesting insight that you have given. I'm very happy to that. In fact, your world database that you have, happiness database, is a truly breakthrough idea that you have created with such a large database. I think lots of studies can be done. And you have, while I was going through that database, I had noticed that you did mention that in our conversation as well, that the average Japanese is maybe marginally happier than average Indian. But if you adjust, sorry?
Yeah, I didn't understand the last sentence.
No, average Japanese is happier than the average Indian.
Yeah.
So, but if you adjust for the variability across the population, that is a standard deviation, this difference seems to disappear more or less, and
Okay.
both seem to be similar. It is for the better understanding of all of us, especially about high variability across the society in both these countries.
Yes, let's then go to the.
Yes.
So here we have the inequality adjusted happiness.
Right.
And then, well, I select on nation. And then I go to India. And here in India,
Right.
we have a pretty high standard deviation, and the average is 6.1, and they are on place 47. And Japan, well, the inequality is a bit lower, and average is marginally higher, and Japan is on 51. Well, marginally better than India, but actually very close.
Okay. So, is there a way this stratification of these data, meaning analyze the rich of one country with the rich of the other country, middle class of one country with the middle class of the other country? Is that such a analysis is also possible using your database?
That is possible. Well, let me go to India because there's less findings, so it's easier selecting. Then we go to correlational findings, and then we go to income.
Right.
And well, we have 22 findings in.
I see.
And so I select these findings. Come on. Yes. And then we must, well, let's go for the most recent, that is, but it is, we must have the general public, and then in whole India.
Right.
I see on this, oh, well, yeah, this the working age people.
Right.
Well, let's see what it is. Income. And here we see that it's positive.
I see. Okay.
And now go to Japan. If we
Right.
see similar,
Right.
but you see the effect is not very big.
I see.
It's only on this measure of happiness.
Right.
How often do you feel that you're really enjoying life?
Right.
Now I go to Japan. Mm. And I go to correlates. And I go to income, 20. And if well, we should have the general population.
Mhm.
Oh, here we have a measure, but this is income and assets.
Right.
And here we have, yes, but it is another year. So if I select here on the most recent, this is income and assets. This is household annual income.
Right.
And here we see a similar pattern.
Right.
It's significant,
Right.
but it's pretty small. Now, the control variables differ a bit.
Sure.
So if you would really compare, you should have the same controls. And possibly if you search further here, you find studies that are better comparable.
Right. Okay.
But
you.
yes, higher income typically goes together with greater happiness. And yeah, one reason is that it's nice to be able to spend. But another effect is that there is selection.
Right.
Happy people typically have higher livability,
Right.
and for that reason earn more money.
Right.
So if you want to know what a raise of income does,
Right.
then you have to go to longitudinal studies and see the effect of current happiness on later income. Let me
Right.
show how that works. Then you go to correlational findings, income, income. Well, and then I do not go to a particular nation because we don't probably have that.
Right.
Income, and then we look at the development of income over time.
Mhm.
And then we look at later income.
Right.
And here we have the later level of income, or whether you get better than the neighbors. And you see there are 12 findings. And well, let me select a recent one. Well, the recent one is not so recent.
Right.
And here you see that the ones who got greater income in the end got, well, overall, the effect is slightly negative
I see.
in this study.
Right.
And
No, I think it's a very nice database which you have tried to bring in all the studies done across the globe.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And well, if you want to know what has been established scientifically, you can
Right.
find your way through the data.
Right.
And that means that a lot of hypotheses you have in mind may already have been tested.
Right. But from your understanding, Professor Root, the Western welfare states seem to be more happy than rest of the world. And these are, and there should be variability across the Western European nations. So what factors do you think contribute to this variability across Western European nations? Like you say, Danes are happier than, say, Germans. So
Yeah, and then I think the comparison with Italy is better. Because if you have a welfare state, of course you get benefits, but you pay a lot of tax. What the Danish do, about half their income. Yeah, well, positive and negative. In Italy, there is actually another system for income insurance, that is the family. And so their state benefits are low, also taxes are low, and in Italy it's also difficult to raise a lot of tax, so they are more dependent on the family. And that has its advantages, and it brings the family together, but it also has the disadvantages. If there's a family conflict, you're dependent, and well, and if you're dependent on the family also decides on things you would rather decide on your own. For instance, whom to marry or what occupation to have. And so the dark side of the cozy, strong family bonds is that they can be too strong. And I think that is a problem both in India and in Japan.
Very good.
Yeah. Well, if you take the broad picture over the whole world, you don't see a correlation between welfare expenditures and happiness, because in some countries it's positive, in others it's negative. And in Europe, if you take, well, say Northwestern Europe, which is, well, highly individualized, and where we have typically weaker bonds with the family, and we have more money to pay tax, there the effect is positive.
Right. Wonderful. Thank you. I think you have given the pros as well as the cons of becoming richer, and as you said, family, every close family relationships has great number of positives, but as you pointed out, there are many negatives as well.
Yeah, and that is actually the case for all the correlates. And we just discussed income, and of course, it's nice to have something to spend, but you must also work for it. And it produces family balance conflicts, and sometimes there's jealousy. And so even to income, there are positive and negative effects. And what the correlations tell us is how the positives and negatives balance in different situations, in different countries, in different times.
Thank you. Prof, I have a related question, again, related correlation, but intuition tells us that as one ages and becomes more mature, one would tend to become happier. Of course, there are the flip side that you will become maybe less healthy as you age. But do you see some correlation or some relationship between age and happiness in the study?
Yes, I see, and I can see because a lot of colleagues have investigated this relationship. Um, and then again, we see that the balance, there's of course positives, you become wiser, you gather resources, but on the other hand, your health goes down, and that balance differs across countries and times. What we see in West European nations, such as in my country, we see there a slight U curve. And so you're happy when you're still a student, then you get in real life, you get a wife, you get a mortgage, you get children, and you are in a time pressure and making a career. But well, once the career is made, the children have left the home and the mortgage is paid. Around age 50, you are a bit happier. By the time you're also happier. And yes, you get happier. And in the statistic, you see that happiness rises even after age 70. But that is partly a selection effect because unhappy people die earlier. And so in the end, you have a residue of happy, great people.
Okay.
That's at least in, well, say, the most developed nations. In most other nations, you see a negative. For instance, in Russia, you see it goes down. And I think in India, it also goes down.
Professor Ruth, one of the as you are one of the foremost researchers in this positive psychology field, especially happiness, what would be your recommendations? Because we mentioned about the public choice as one area which you focus on. What would be your recommendations to the government of a nation to increase the happiness of the lives of their people?
That is, invest in their own quality, and especially in the quality of the bureaucracy. Yeah, it may sound strange that you link happiness to bureaucrats, but they are the angels of happiness. In a well-organized society, where the civil servants are competent, not corrupt, and where there is little difference between the rules and practice, that provides the citizens for a predictable environment, of course, for doing business, as institutional economics has learned us, but also for individuals. And in such a predictable environment, you can make choices and choose the life that fits you best. And just as market organizations can choose the products and the consumers that fit their production capacity best. And then, of course, you see the related indicators, the modernity of society, the rule of law, and later also women emancipation. And just equality between sexes. Well, that means actually that women have more choice and that even males have more choice to do more household work or invest more in the raising of their children. But interestingly, there is almost no correlation with income inequality. Income inequality, it appears, can have good effects on average happiness of people, because especially in developing economies, it pushes, it provides incentives for entrepreneurship.
This is also slightly counterintuitive
It is, yes, both the effect of the bureaucrats and the non-effect of income inequality. But that's what we do research for, to check our intuitions.
Wonderful. One last question I have for you. You gave very good advice to the government. Now, as an individual, would you like to, because many of our listeners in their individual capacities also would like to learn from you as to what interventions that they would need to do in their lives to achieve greater levels of happiness?
Now, yeah, one step would be a check if you don't have a psychological problem.
Okay.
About 20% of us have some psychological problem, and even more of us have a mental, physical problem.
Right.
And yes, psychotherapy mostly helps. If you don't have, then, and you're not too happy, well, then the question is, do I lead the right life? And then the trick is to find a way of life that fits you better. Well, that can be a risky business. You divorce your wife, you take another job. Yeah, well, that has the risk of ending from the frying pan into the fire. But today you can reduce that risk a bit by looking at what has happened to people like you who did that before. And here we can profit on the research on the longitudinal research. And one source which you can use is the happiness indicator. That is a self-help tool where you can record your happiness and where you can compare to the happiness of other participants. And among these participants are people, well, who quit a job and quit a wife. And you can see how they ended.
I see. Oh, very good.
It will remain risky all the time, but you can still make a more informed decision.
Right. I think benchmarking is one idea you are giving them, but yes, I could understand what you are talking about. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think there are many questions from the audience. I will select a few for you to answer. One of them is, in a way you have already answered this, but I will repeat the question. What do you think could be the practical utility of this type of database that you have created? Can it also predict wealth or potential or prosperity of nations? You have answered this, but can you again summarize your answer to this question?
The research informs us about the past. And I don't think that there are general rules, general happiness laws, which allow us to predict much in the future. Because the effects are typically very much dependent on place and situation. But what you can do is look, for instance, in a developing country like India, how, for instance, old age pensions have worked out on the happiness of the citizens, and the individual citizen in India can also see what happened to people who stopped working when they reached a pension age in comparison to people who continued working. And then, of course, you should compare with people in a comparable situation, marriage, but also occupation and your former income. Informed choice is the key.
informed choice. That is the key. Okay, thank you very much. Another question from the audience, which I think is in the minds of many people who are listening. We in India are told that our neighboring kingdom, Bhutan, has created, instead of GDP, they talk about the happiness, gross happiness product. So instead of domestic product. So they are keen to know what is Bhutan's happiness index.
Well, let's go to Bhutan.
Yeah, after adjusting for the variability, etc.
Oh, Bhutan is so small that I have difficulty finding it here.
I think
Yes.
in your
No. No, this is China. Well, I take it from the list.
List, I think list is easier.
List is easier.
Especially after adjustment.
Yeah, but that is not easy. Bhutan. No, it's the best thing if I. No, it's as if China had already conquered Bhutan.
Okay, I hope not.
Here we are in Bhutan. Well, you see, they're not extraordinarily happy. About 5.
What is that number? We can't read that number here.
Well, say it's 5.1.
5.1.
It's a bit better than in India. And actually not too bad for a country in that stage of development. Now, mind that here we have a problem with the term happiness. And what the Bhutanese mean with happiness is actually what I called the livability. The situation, income, and religion, and things like that. Actually, the term gross national happiness is used for a political program of controlled modernization. And well, the historical background is that the Bhutanese saw the Chinese conquer Tibet, and then they realized that their politics of splendid isolation was not possible anymore, and that they had to open to India. But for a medieval country to open to a relatively modern country like India is likely to give a protest. A bit like the Ayatollah revolutions in Iran.
Right.
And well, how to do that? And instead of opening to India, they said, we go for a gross national happiness, which sounds much better. But actually, the program is one of temporized modernization. And the temporization is mainly in one of the pillars of gross national happiness, that is the maintaining of culture. So people are supposed to dress traditionally, and the church is held in respect, which in the medieval political situations of nobility and church is a logical choice. And modernization-wise, they do good, and they're relatively happy, and there is not a happiness dip, which you often see in countries with rapid modernization. So I think they are doing well,
Right.
and that it was wise to pick up with the upcoming ideas in the 1970s to use that politically in the situation of Bhutan.
Okay, thank you. I think you have clarified a very important point for us to understand our northern neighbor.
Yeah.
So one question which is also asked, one of the listeners is asking, you mentioned that the measurements are subjective because they have to answer a questionnaire. But is this also possible? The question being asked is there a biological measurement? Like something in the brain, you map it and then say that, oh, this brain is happier or this human being is happier than the other by measuring something about the biological elements, hormones.
Yes, well, in principle, it should be possible because the responses are produced by the brain. Yes. But, well, if you go to your PC, it is difficult to get this picture. And so the best we have is not how life satisfaction is produced in the brain, but we have some indication of feeling good or bad, which is actually more universal also in our kind of species. Most mobile animals can feel good or bad, and that leads them in situations which are good or bad. And we differ from, say, the dog and the cat, that we can realize how we have felt in the past, how good or bad, and that we can use that information also in our evaluation of overall life. And because if you assess how satisfied you are with your life as a whole, well, then the most important information is how well you feel most of the time. But there's also other things. Am I successful? Did I leave something to society, which is more cognitive? And life satisfaction is typically a combination of affective and cognitive appraisals of life. And these cognitive appraisals we cannot capture as yet. The affective appraisals we can capture a bit, but not totally. In the past, we thought that there was one pleasure center. It appears that there are more.
So you're saying there's much more to learn. I mean, there's many things unknown about the brain and the centers in the brain which measure the happiness.
Yes. And if you want to know how science has advanced, then you go to the database, and then you surf in the bibliography, and then we have determinants of happiness, and there is a subcategory here of what happens in the brain. Wait a minute, where is it? It's part of the need gratification, yeah. Need theory. Oh yeah, the physiological basis. And for instance, here is what we know now about neural mechanisms. Well, there are 20 publications. I've read them all, and I don't know the answer yet.
Very good, very good. I think you have answered that if you dig into this world happiness database, you can find out the latest research done in these areas.
Yeah.
Thank you. One final question, if you are up to it. One last question. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. This question is talking about FOMO, or the fear of missing out. We all want to be there always 24/7, because if we close our eyes and we may miss out something very interesting. So the fear of missing out and the pressure of the career growth seem to be some of the reasons for unhappiness at the individual level. How does one overcome these type of pressures or tensions caused by these pressures?
Well, the first question is, how bad is fear? Is that fear? And there are again positive and negative effects. Well, the negative is pretty obvious. You do too much and you get a burnout. But the positive effect is that you go out, that you try things, and that in checking by missing out, you discover that something you don't like. And so in the long term, at some cost, you get a better view of what fits you. And of course, the reverse is what is called fear of happiness. Oh, well, I better not do it and take life as it is. Yes, then you experience nothing, and then you can remain at level 5 for the rest of your life.
Okay.
But yes, of course, if you have a burnout, that is a strong signal. I ran too fast. And yeah, one of the things we must learn in life is where our optimum of activity is. Typically, you can have too less and too much, and there is, well, this pattern. And well, where's your top? Yeah, you have to try out. And that means that sometimes you're bored and sometimes you're overstressed. And that is one of the reasons why elderly people get happier, because they have learned where their optimum is.
I think you're advocating the golden middle path.
Yes.
So don't go to either of the extremes. But I think long back, Buddha said the same thing.
Yeah, but you may try the extreme. And you better try it and learn, okay, that's too much, and then never experience it.
I see. Okay, thank you. And it has been a wonderful session. Actually, we could go on and on because you have such wealth of knowledge and wisdom to share with all of us. But maybe we will bank on it on another meet on this subject. Thank you very much, Professor Ruth, for your wonderful session. It's been a
my pleasure.
Eye-opener and great learning experience for me in particular, but the audience also has benefited hugely from this. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Goodbye.